Hello, students. This is Mrs. Donahue, and we are having one of our final Taming of the Shrew lectures. This is going to be a big one because, unfortunately slash fortunately, taming is slightly different than some of the other Shakespeare's that you learn in school. Like, for example, when I teach Hamlet or Macbeth, a lot of time is spent dissecting a lot of speeches. In Taming, there's not exactly a lot of them. It's very speech minimal. There's a lot of dialogue back and forth between characters, and in that there's a lot of dialogue back and forth between characters, there's an awful lot of jokes. We've talked about punning and having to know about like the doubling of different words. All of this is really good for pretty much acts 1 through 4. There's not really too many other times where a character stops and talks. Which is typically in Shakespeare where we see a few interesting things. One, it's the best writing in Shakespeare, typically his speeches. The man he just knows how to do it. Speeches are moments where the character essentially goes center stage, looks out at the audience, and lets loose. In Richard II, these are moments that bring you to tears. It's a character you don't even like, and then he opens his mouth for these speeches, and you're like, but every word he says is like liquid gold. Macbeth, you might really struggle with Macbeth as a character, and then he goes on and on and on these speeches, and you're like, there's something about the man. I do want to listen to him. And Hamlet, who I hate, in a play that I think is vastly overrated. Yes, I said it. Hamlet opens his mouth to talk, and you're like, oh God, I know that I hate him, but he brings some interesting points, like the most thoughtful material, phrased in the most intentional ways, is always in the speeches. So, having said that, we have potentially the most interesting thing that goes on in all of Taming of the Shrew. So, in previous things I said, we had to pay attention to the fact that in a play where you have the arc, right? The rising action, climax, falling action, you're always looking for the resolution to our problems, especially because this is a comedy. Comedies open with problems, they end with solutions, and they typically end happily ever after. So, like, we are looking for the couple who can't be together and really want to be together. We have problems, we're trying to get together. Oh, we got together, yay, everyone's married. Especially when there's more than one couple, like in this play, there's 2 couples that are looking to get married. It usually ends with 2 marriages or 2 announcements of, we are getting married tomorrow, whatever. Here, interestingly enough, Kate gets married in Act 3, early, to the point where one of you was like, really that early? I thought we were going to have more problems. The thing about her is not the marriage. So the solution to whatever problem she has is solved by Act 5, and this speech is the key to that solution. If you're familiar with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they build a machine and they say, what's the answer to the most important question in the universe? And the machine eventually, after millions of years of considering that, belts out 42, which is a ridiculous answer. And then they say, well, what's the answer mean? And the machine said, well, it's the answer to the most important question in the universe. And then they realized that they didn't ask a more specific question, right? So if we know that Act 5 is the solution to our problem, we know we have a problem, but maybe we don't know what the problem is. If the problem is that Kat behaves badly, we see her behaving well. If the problem isn't as simple as she behaves badly, but that she is misunderstood and isolated and alone and she has nobody like her, and that's making her behave badly, maybe that's how we solve the problem. A lot of people dismiss Taming of the Shrew as the brainwash play. Petruchio beats and starves her until she behaves, and this is thus a bad feminist play. We don't like it. It's bad to women. But it's a comedy. In comedies, you're not necessarily meant to take everything completely seriously, but also, I thought the Meryl Streep version, for all that Meryl Streep comes off pretentious to me sometimes, for all that that explanation was really, really useful for you guys. I bet some of you didn't listen to it. So Meryl Streep said, he's starving her But there's really no guidance anywhere that he would beat her. That's been sort of led in by people who are like, abusive behavior is beating your wife. Abusive behavior is beating your wife. Yelling at her, potentially, yeah. Stomping his foot and throwing fits, absolutely. He threatens at one point. She hits him in the wooing sequence, and he says, you do it again, you're getting it back. Fair play, though, right? I mean, she smacks him, and then he's like, I've been really patient with you, but you hit me again, you're going to get these hands. She hit first. And in these sequences here, though, he starves her. But I'm going to say, you guys always are telling me you're starving, and you're clearly not starving. You're hungry. She's used to getting anything she wants. Her father's wealthy, and he gives her anything to stop the tantrums, which is bad. Like, that's how spoiled kids get worse. That's how tantrums are made worse. Like, you've made her this. So maybe for the first time in her life, she was like, I want cake and meat and things. And someone said no. I'm doing this with my daughter. At some point, we went down a rabbit hole where chocolate milk became the only thing she ate. It's the only beverage she wants. The only milk she wants is chocolate. So I looked at her and I was like, no, that's not what you get. And she looks at you like you've offended her deeply, throws herself on the floor and begins screaming. I am not an abusive mother because I won't let her have 17 cups of chocolate milk a day. So take some of that into consideration when you think about Kat and Petruchio. Here, in this last sequence, there's some really interesting lead up to this final speech. But this speech is where nerd credentials are made. So like people read this whole play and there's not so much in the way of vast disagreement of interpretation. And then you get to the end here, and I mean, people start like academically mud wrestling over what this speech means. So let's give it its fair attention. At the beginning of Act 5, Scene 2, you are at the wedding, which is technically the wedding of Bianca and Lucentio, their wedding celebration, their wedding dinner. But all of the weddings are kind of celebrated here because Hortensio married the widow, who he said was like always chasing him and stuff. And we know that Hortensio is kind of useless, so we shouldn't have listened to his description of her because she definitely doesn't come off that way. She is sassy pants. She is insulting to him. She clearly just thinks that he's a little bit useless and will do whatever she says, easy to manipulate, that she doesn't have to listen to him. The fact that a widow would remarry is actually kind of interesting because women had the most power that they were ever going to have as widows. They inherited property, they inherited wealth, they were allowed to control it, and everyone was like, I mean, it's not like you killed your husband, so, I mean, I guess you can keep all of this money and power and privilege and position. I guess you just get to keep it because he's dead. Good for you. They encouraged her to remarry because then that power and that property went to her children or went to her next husband. So it went back to a man, essentially. But they couldn't force her to remarry. They could just encourage it. So the fact that the widow chooses Hortensio, I guess, just tells us that he's wealthy and stupid because she thinks this is another opportunity to make more money. She doesn't seem to care any other way. So the widow's refusing to listen to Hortensio. He's kind of like, what am I going to do with this woman? Lucentio is saying like, oh, I'm sure Bianca's going to be great. And then Bianca starts really acting up. So if we thought that Bianca and Kat were vastly different as sisters, Act 5 gives us some interesting food for thought. Maybe the whole time they are exactly the same, but they just knew how to act in front of their dad. Like Bianca in front of her father before, when her father is the one who has primary control over her life and who she marries and stuff like that. Maybe Bianca just knows before, hey, don't be a jerk in front of dad. Think it, don't do it. Think it, don't do it. And Kat just does it all the time. And she can't stand that Bianca, maybe she knows Bianca thinks the same thing, but Bianca doesn't ever get caught. Maybe that's why they're so angry at each other. Because Bianca is a sassy pants. She essentially goes like, I'll think whatever I want and do whatever I want. Thank you very much. As a married woman, she's kind of like She's not a widow, but she's like the next level of like protection. Daddy doesn't own you, your husband does. And she chose a husband who adores the hell out of her. Is Lucentio ever going to tell her no? Probably not. So this is a really powerful position for her because she kind of owns the man a little bit as opposed to being owned by the man. Good choices. It's also like, as Shakespeare said in the sonnet, right? There's a marriage of true minds. You seek the equality. You seek the thing that's going to help you grow and better yourself. You seek the thing that's going to create love and blossom it and make your marriage better. I don't know if you get the impression that a marriage where one person is really vastly above the other is ever going to come back into equality. So if we thought like, oh, that Lucentio, he really is going to be on equal footing with Bianca. Suddenly we see Bianca acting up and we realize that she's got him right where she wants him, underneath. Like underfoot, he is going to be chasing this woman. Now, we've had all these arguments and different ways of interpreting Petruchio and Caterina, but potentially here, what's interesting is that Petruchio's been stirring the pot. He's been going to the husbands and basically saying, oh, you think my wife's badly behaved, do you? That's interesting. Anyone else have opinions on this? Anyone else? And they all go like, oh yeah, none of our wives are ever going to be as bad as yours. Yours is like the optimum bad wife. She's the worst wife. And he goes, really interesting. Do you want to put money on this? And they're like, that's never a good sign. When someone counters your statement with a bet, usually means they feel they're going to win the bet. So they go, I guess, let's go 10. And he goes, 10. And they're like, 20. This is not good. And he goes, 20, 400, baby. And they're like, that's just insane money. We're not going to do that. But he goes, no, we're going to have a bet. So everyone place your bets. I bet you, if all the women go over to another room, and I bet you my wife's the only one that listens. Now, it's interesting. When the women leave, the widow had been really rude to Kat's face and basically been like, you are a nasty, angry woman who should not be in my presence during my wedding. And I can only imagine how the actress doing Kat would play that. Do you do it real? Am I then? Thank you. Thank you for your criticism. Is it very like, and Petruchio's maybe just kind of tapping her shoulder to keep her from yelling? Are they both like, thank you for your opinion? It would be fascinating if both Petruchio and Kate had the moment of like, this woman really said that. Because then Petruchio sets up the bet and he tells them, I bet my wife will listen and yours won't. And sure enough, Hortensio sends the servant to get the widow. The widow's like, I'm not coming. Lucentio sends the servant to get Bianca, and she goes, if he wants to talk to me, he can come to me. And then Petruchio goes, go get Kate. And she comes in. She's the only one who comes in. And everyone else is really shocked that she comes in. And he goes, go get those disobedient women, drag them in here, and give them hell. So if the rules of the time are that once you're married, you have to listen to your husband, first of all, with her father had no control over her. His mechanism for getting her to behave was just giving her whatever she wanted and then getting frustrated with her tantrums. She never had an equal sort of way to approach her dad. Maybe he's not the world's worst father, but he's not handling her the right way. Petruchio gets some breakthrough with her. And he goes, go get him. And she's like, thank you, that I will. And then when she literally physically drags the widow and Bianca in from the next room, isn't that like old school Kat? Isn't this the woman who like throws stuff at him and scratches her sister's face? Like this is the Shrew of the early acts, physically dragging two other women into the scene. And then he goes, baby, give it to him. Someone's got to clear her to tell people off. Like if her father's not saying it's okay to say things and she does, that's bad behavior. If her husband goes, honey, let him have it. Then you've been given carte blanche. You can do whatever you want, essentially. If your husband says go ahead, Go ahead. So that is the conditions surrounding this speech. And I think it's really important to say that. He says to her, give it to him and start with the widow. And it's important to start with the widow because the widow was nasty to her face minutes before. Minutes before this, the widow was like, you're just a nasty lady. And he goes, start with that one. Start with that one, hon. Start with that one. Go. And we know Petruchio loves to start trouble. We know it because every opportunity he's had to like poke the hornet's nest, he does. He likes to cause a little bit of chaos and then watch it unfold, and he laughs at it. He thinks it's funny because I guess he thinks a lot of other people's problems are petty and they make their own worst situations, and he just enjoys letting it blow up in their faces. So that's very on brand with Petruchio to kind of be like, this lady set it up, she asked for it, and now she's being given the business. So Kat gets to yell at her, but also gets to yell at her sister. And we know that there's been a lot of tension between the sisters. It makes a whole lot of sense that if Kat's been extra frustrated with her sister because they're actually very similar and Bianca got away with it and Kate didn't, it makes sense now that, Petruchio would be like, nope, lay it out on that one too. Have fun, baby. And he literally sits back and watches. Now, in almost every version that I've seen, while Petruchio's watching this scene, it is with what can only be described as a shit-eating grin on his face. Like he is watching the other men and he's like, yeah, listen to that. You get him, baby. Because she's just tearing into these women in the most polite way possible. So, minor side note, my grandfather was the speechwriter for the Prime Minister of Canada. It's a fun fact. Oh, the McNeils are in several Canadian history books. We're important. Anyway, my grandfather always used to say it was very important that you learn how to tell somebody to go to hell in a way that makes them want to pack a bag and look forward to the trip. Kat's always been saucy, but no one has ever taught her, with all of her wit and all of her intelligence and all of the smart, funny things she says, no one has ever taught her how to turn it on people where you're nasty, but it may be in the politest way you could be. You're being rude to them, but just polite enough that they can't say anything. There are certainly ways to look at somebody and sound like you're complimenting them or sound like you're just giving a direction, but you're actually giving an insult. Think of situations like if you're hosting a party and you invite your friend and your friend comes really late to your party, to the point where it's like when they enter, now everything's about them. And you would look over at them. Now you could start a fight with them. Of course you could. Or you could look over at them and be like, I'm so happy that you finally showed up. We've been wondering where you were. And, having that moment of finally showed up. They know that you're saying something to them. You know you're saying something to them. But the words that are coming out of your mouth, if they were to just be written on paper, don't look like you're saying something to them. So also keep that in mind when you're looking at Kate's speech. The technical words versus how she's delivering them are different, which is why if you didn't watch the 5 different versions of this speech prior to reading it, you should, because you get 5 ways to hear it in your head. Now you get Mama's version. All right. Fie, unknit that threatening, unkind brow, and dart not scornful glances from those eyes, to wound thy lord, thy king, thy governor. So I have given you a breakdown line by line of the kind of translations. Line by line, I have dissected it. But there's also the sentences themselves. That's a whole thought. Those 3 lines are one thought. And essentially, she's looking at both of them who must be making terrible faces. And she's like, wipe that off your face. How dare you? And instead of just being like, how dare you be awful? She's like, how dare you do that to your husbands? Now think of who's listening. Think of the fact that the father, the 3 husbands, and all of their male friends are the primary audience right now. It's like Petruchio's made her realize in some way, like, think about your audience. All of these men who think the world of themselves and their wives, and like the whole point was obedience of wives. Think of who's listening. So does she really care what the husband's opinions are? No, she wants to lay out some opinion on these women. But the men are going to think she's just being nasty if she doesn't somehow make them think that this is about them. Typical. So, it blots thy beauty as frosts do bite the meads, confounds thy fame as whirlwinds shake fair buds, and in no sense is meet or amiable. So, being rude makes you ugly, ruins your reputation. There's no sense to it, which is always something you say to people. Like, if someone's being rude, don't you always go like, oh yeah, that's real good looking on you. That's real pretty. It's an easy thing to throw at somebody. And for me, honestly, one way or another doesn't kind of tell me what she's saying. She's just telling them rudeness is an ugly behavior. A woman moved is like a fountain troubled, muddy, ill-seeming, thick, bereft of beauty. And while it is so, none so dry or thirsty will deign to sip or touch one drop of it. It's a great metaphor. Or really a simile, because there's a like in there. A woman moved, so a bad behaved woman, a nasty woman, is like a clogged up sink or fountain. When the sink is all clogged up, the water that comes out of it or gets stuck in it is dirty. So that the woman, when she clogs up her sort of natural state with this bad behavior, becomes this thick, muddy, ugly thing. And no matter how thirsty someone is, they don't drink that dirty water. So no matter how loving or kind someone is, they're not going to put up with your crap if you're like this. Like, your beauty only takes you so far, because your personality is what's going to be what shuts people down, which is essentially her problem from the first few acts, right? She clearly was good looking, young, wealthy, but no one was going to put up with her crap. And maybe now she's learned, like, I was definitely part of that problem. But also, she's kind of lucky, right? The only person who put up with it enough to show her how to change it is Petruchio. I mean, of the marriages, which one do we look at and we're like, that's the marriage I'm most interested in being in? Petruchio's and Kate's, right? That's the marriage I'm most interested in. Who cares about Lucentio and Bianca? We don't even really see how their marriage goes, except to see that Lucentio's always going to be apparently chasing this girl. And he almost seems to have like picked what he thought was the better sister and then been like, oh, like when you buy what you think's going to be a beautiful like sweater or something at the store and you get it home and it is trash ugly on you. Like he made a whole bunch of fuss to get this girl and now seems to be a little like, Thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign, one that cares for thee, and for thy maintenance commits his body to painful labor both by sea and land, to watch the night in storms, the day in cold, whilst thou liest home, warm at home, secure and safe. And he craves no other tribute at thy hands but love, fair looks, and true obedience. Now, what's interesting about this to me? A, thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, whatever. That's a whole bunch of very typical statements from the time. You would frequently compare husbands to those. You would compare them to princes also. For thy maintenance commits his body. Essentially, husbands were in charge of bringing wealth into the family. Now, what's interesting is Bianca and Kate, and assuming the widow, given as what I told you about widows, they are all independently wealthy. Now, they have no control over their own money, but marrying them brought money to their husbands, so that their husbands do not work. None of their husbands work. They had money, and then they married wealthy women who therefore gave them money. So they are not working men. This statement is ridiculous to all of the husbands in the room. The husbands don't see themselves that way, though. But does Petruchio? Do you think Petruchio sees himself as like this hardworking, laboring guy who's going out into the doldrums every day and coming home covered in soot? No. He knows that he's independently wealthy. He knows exactly who he is. That's why he went through the whole kerfuffle in the last scene, the last act, of having her a custom-made beautiful gown and then literally ripped it to shreds in front of her. Do you know how expensive that is? It'd be like ordering somebody, like not Louboutin, he's shoes, but like Gucci. It'd be like ordering someone a Gucci dress, having it delivered, showing it to them, and then literally tearing the sleeves off of it in front of them and being like, do you care what people see you wear? He has the money to do that. He has the money to take the custom Gucci hat he has made for her and literally step on it. So none of these men fit that description. So that's why I don't think it's entirely a serious statement from her, because they're all independently wealthy. For thy maintenance commits his body to painful labor. None of them work. None of them. And while thou liest warm at home, secure and safe, and he craves no other tribute at thy hands but love, fair looks, and true obedience. Too little payment for so great a debt. Now just imagine that Petruchio's sitting there, watching her give these women hell, but also looking at the men who are looking at each other going, she is so right, we work incredibly hard to take care of these ungrateful women. Can you believe these women, their ungratefulness? Like all the men kind of patting each other on their backs, going like, you work hard, bro. And Petruchio kind of looking at them like, God, they're all just great big fools, aren't they? Just a whole load of tomfoolery going around here. Like they think she's serious. They don't even understand. So I imagine that he's in on the joke. Like she and him at this point should be staring, like looking at each other almost, where she's like looking at these women like this and then kind of looking at him like, yeah, we know what the real truth of the whole matter is. Such duty as the subject owes the prince, even such a woman oweth to her husband. And when she is forward, peevish, sullen, sour, and not obedient to his honest will, which she is but a foul contending rebel and graceless traitor to her loving lord. This is all very typical. You would have kind of seen the husband as like the king of his own castle, so comparing him to a prince, very typical. And when women behave in these ways, which are the behaviors that we saw from the widow and Bianca, it is but a traitor to her lord. So you have Hortensio and Lucentio over there all butthurt that their wives didn't listen to them. So imagine them going, yes, 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 this woman knows. She understands these other women. I am ashamed that women are so simple to offer war where they should kneel for peace. Now, do you think at any point Kat's not willing to fight for something? No, I don't get that impression. But she's learned a valuable lesson from Petruchio in choosing her battles. So like he said to her, like, what does it matter to you if I said it's 7 a.m. or 2 a.m? What does it matter? What does it matter if, like, I say it's the moon? That's where you get the scene from her where she goes, fine, it's the moon then, whatever. You say it's the moon, it's the moon, it's the blessed moon, I don't care anymore. Stupid fight to have. Think of the one I said I had with my husband. Okay, fine, it's not a big spoon, it's a little spoon, it's in the right hole, whatever. You put the spoon away correctly. I'm not having this fight. That's a thing that happens in relationships, especially the longer they go on. You have to say to yourself, nope, this is a stupid fight. Do not have this fight. Do not say one more word about the spoons because no one wants to have this fight. So she says, I am ashamed that these women are so simple. And simple means stupid. Simple would translate partially to mean-spirited, but really simple means stupid. So she literally gets to call these other women stupid. Can you imagine how good that makes her feel? That's our girl. That is our girl from Act 1 and 2. Like, she's like, I can't believe y'all are so stupid. To offer war where they should kneel for peace. You could do some interesting physical humor there, too. Or seek for rule and supremacy and sway when they are bound to serve, love, and obey. Why are our bodies soft and weak and smooth, unapt to toil and trouble in the world? Their bodies are not used to trouble like work, trouble like hardship, trouble like going out and fighting. Now, this is all very, very typical. You would have mentioned the frailty and softness of women's bodies to them all the time. That's what you would do. You'd be like, these women with their soft bodies. That's just something that goes on. We know that women might have soft bodies, but like, I mean, especially, I just came off my second childbirth. Like, men for the last however many thousands of years women been having babies eventually have a moment of their life where they go, I couldn't do that. That's too much. Maybe they have other things that I don't understand, but that I definitely could not do. So there's always some weirdness to women referring to the softness and weakness of their own bodies, which is inevitably just kind of giving lip service to men. Come, you forward and unable worms. Because all she's doing in the scene, in the lines right before that, is just kind of playing into that, yes, you men are so big and strong, you vile, vile worms of women. That's our girl. That's our shrew. Our shrew is yelling at these other women. And the men are just like eating it up, because now she knows what to say to get these men to listen to her rant and rave. My mind hath been as big as one of yours. My heart is great, my reason happily more, to bandy word for word and frown for frown. But now I see our lances are but straws. So she essentially says, I was a lot like you, but I realize that all the stuff we're fighting over is kind of stupid. Like, it's dumb of me to fight with you and put these words back and forth with you. It's like children playing with play swords. Like, we only think that we're having real arguments and we're not. Damn. She really just told them that everything that they think is important about standing up to their husbands is stupid and petty. And that she has no more patience left to bandy with them, to fight with them. Now, who else is left to fight with then, I ask you? If she's not fighting with the women, who's she fighting with? The men. And the only one in the room who seems to understand what she's saying is Petruchio. We know that because of his reaction to her after the speech. He's the only one that's following her. She's actually really, really smart. And she is now using it the best way she can. Our lances are but straws. Like, these petty fights between women are just play fights. Our strength is weak, our weakness past compare, that seeming to be most which we indeed least are. In other words, and this might be the truest thing she says, we pretend most to be something that we are not. So the opposite, right? If we are really, really loud, we're trying so hard to cover up the fact that we actually don't know what we want to say. Like, if we are acting so offended, we actually don't care. Like, you're always overblowing your reaction, trying to rein it in and cover up the opposite truth about yourself. So a lot of times, and we said this about Kate earlier, the students who are maybe the loudest and saying, I don't care what you think, really think about it all the time. And they're deeply connected to it, and they worry about it, and they're anxious about it. So she's definitely putting them down there and kind of saying, like, you're trying so hard to act like you're in control. You're not. You're not in control. And she's right. I mean, she's definitely right. If they don't understand how to work their marriages out, then they have no control, really. Because ultimately, they've both signed themselves away to men. And if they don't know how to get some control out of that man, real control, where it's like good for them, it's not going to be a fulfilling, successful marriage. No one can take being the alpha dog in their marriage every single solitary day. You don't respect somebody who doesn't stand equal with you. Then veil your stomachs, for it is no boot, and place your hand below your husband's foot. In token of which duty, if he please, my hand is ready. May it do him ease. Now, this is a sweet moment, because even though Petruchio's kind of been in on the joke the whole time, she turns to him. And in the case of the Meryl Streep, she literally holds out her hand to him. In some of them, she's on her belly, putting her hand on the floor in front of him. Sometimes she just holds her hand out to him, but essentially saying, it is the husband's job to decide whether or not he takes the wife's good obedience and, like, whether she gets to have that from him or not. And in the Meryl Streep, Raul Julia version, what I really liked is she holds that hand out to him, and there's absolutely nothing here that indicates this, but he took the hand and he just pressed it to his face and he kissed it, and he showed her a lot of very genuine affection, because that's a very, very affectionate gesture, like holding someone's hand to your face and kissing it. But essentially, she just showed up those other women. And at the end of the speech, we know Petruchio approves because of what some people remember as the most famous kind of phrase coming out of this. I say there's a wench, which means good girl. Like there's a good woman, there's a good girl. Wench is just a phrase for woman. Come on and kiss me, Kate. Kiss Me, Kate is it's actually a musical on Broadway, but like it is the thing that people remember. Kiss me, Kate, kiss me, Kate. He's kissing her in public in front of all of them. Now he knows that kissing in public embarrasses her a little, but she's begun to get over this at the beginning of the last scene, or the end of the last scene. And no one has anything to say to him. And at the end, what is most interesting is what he says to Lucentio, which is, I won the wager, though you hit the white, and being winner, God give you good night. So it's Lucentio's wedding. This really should be his victory lap. He married Bianca. Bianca actually translates to like the white woman, the white lady. So you hit the white, like you got the thing you wanted. And so because you won the white lady, have a good night. But he basically also says like, I won. He says, I won. I would have my wife over yours any day of the week. The one who's the most proud of and the most in love with their wife is Kate. Now, you might like having someone who listens to you, but you don't love someone who's truly subservient to you. You love somebody who's equal to you. You love somebody who's going to make everything sort of better in your life. You respect them. There does seem to be at the end here an indication that that's how Petruchio feels about Kate, which is an interesting way to look at her speech. All right, this video went on a little longer than I anticipated, but it's good times. 10 Things I Hate About You is next.